Hi guys, it's Elissa at Moat Cottage Homesteading, the small space homesteading channel. And on today's homesteading chat, we're talking about prepping. This video contains adult themes and passionate language. If you have small children around, I recommend you pop your earplugs in. Now, I'm not talking about post-apocalyptic prepping. However, if you want to prep for the post-apocalypse, then that's fine. I've been on the film set of those movies and it really gets you thinking, I must say. But today I'm just talking about general prepping for normal everyday stuff. I first thought about prepping when I was 4 and I was in a car going to kinder with a friend's mum and someone had hit a dog. Now I don't remember if it was our car or somebody else's car. I think it was somebody else's car, and I remember the mother of my friend saying that the dog was left on the road because they didn't have a shovel and they couldn't move the dog. And I was horrified at that someone's pet was on the road still, and this was in Melbourne, city suburbs of Melbourne, and someone's dog was on the road still dead. And it was just like, well, I thought to myself in that moment that when I grow up I'm going to have a shovel in my car so that if I ever hit a dog I'll be prepared. Now when I got my car and I was driving, I didn't have a shovel because I just figured I would just move it. I'm not that squirmish that I couldn't move a dead dog if I had to, and thankfully I've never had to. But I was always prepared in other ways. I always carried around in my boot other things like oil, water, coolant, brake fluid, transmission fluid, stocking, even chewing gum, because you never know where you need to seal something up. So I had an array of things. Oh, and the stockings were to make an emergency fan belt. I don't know why I just didn't carry around a spare fan belt. But anyway, stockings is what I had at the time, so that's what I carried around. And so I could fix my car and do anything I needed to do. Now, I was also with a roadside assistance company too that I could call out if needed, but the amount of times I needed to change tyres and do basic maintenance was quite often in an old car that I had. And she was a muscle car, she was pretty cool. But I did all the maintenance on my car. I even changed my brakes and, you know, did all that sort of stuff. But obviously that's not an emergency situation, that's just general maintenance. But I was prepared because I thought I needed to be able to do these things if I wanted to get to wherever I wanted to go, and I was independent, so I had to fix things myself. Now, I don't expect you all to be out there changing your own brakes, but you should be able to change your own tyre and have the equipment to do that. Because what happens if you get a flat tyre on a day where roadside assist can't get to you for whatever reason, say it's just like crazy busy because it's a heat wave or something happens, you need to be able to do the basic things yourself. I wouldn't even let my kids start driving cars until they got under the bonnet and told me where all the parts of the car were. And let me tell you, when they're young and they want to get behind the wheel, they're keen to learn every part of the car. A first aid kit is another thing you should have in your car. You never know when you're going to come upon an accident or whether someone's just going to get a basic injury and you're going to need to help out. There was one time where I came upon an accident in the countryside. I was the second car on the scene. The first car on the scene had already called for the ambulance to come, but she was in shock and she didn't have anything to help the situation apart from what she'd already done, which was great. I went to my first aid kit and I had a clean nappy and I was able to put that on the head of the victim, which sounds terrible, but a 7-year-old boy had been thrown from the car and had a severe head injury. You could see right inside his head, and I was able to put a nappy on that to keep that contained. I also had gloves so that I wasn't getting blood on me. And I was able to go around to all of the 5 victims of the accident and help them out and calm them down. And they were sort of spread out all over the place. And I was able to help with that situation, and using my first aid kit, it helped it helped them. Thankfully, I haven't had to use that first aid kit like that apart from that one time, but it has been used for other things like severe migraines when I've been, 60 kilometres away from home and I had no vision and I couldn't be a passenger in the car because I was with a learner driver and I needed to be able to see. So even though I wasn't driving, I needed to be able to see so that I could keep an eye on my learner driver. And so luckily I had the first aid kit there and I was able to have some medication on hand. as well as things like blisters and other little minor things along the way where it's been used. When you're out and about, we don't necessarily have access to the shops all the time, depending where we are. We're quite far away from main towns, so when we go somewhere, there's a big countryside in between. A few months back, our electricity went out for quite a few hours. Now, this is not an uncommon thing, but it was quite interesting to me this particular day because it was one of those perfect days where you didn't need the heater on. It was just a lovely day, and it wasn't hot, so people who use air conditioning definitely didn't need their air conditioners on. And I got to social media and I was quite fascinated by the fact that there were a lot of people freaking out. This fascinated me greatly because it wasn't even, I wouldn't even class that as an emergency situation at that point. And people were taking to social media and freaking out. Now, I'm not saying everyone I live near is freaking out and panicking, because I'm sure most people were just fine. It was just the occasional one, that always happens. But it just interested me a lot that people couldn't even make a basic cup of coffee. They weren't prepared enough for that. So I thought, what happens if something really actually happens? And so I just want people to be prepared to be able to make a basic cup of coffee if the power goes out. So just think small. If you don't prep, think small and basic things that you don't want to be inconvenienced with. When there's no power, it affects things like traffic lights and petrol bowsers. You can't get your petrol if there's no electricity. So where we live, we're quite isolated, and if you don't have petrol and you can't buy petrol, if you have an emergency when that's happening, you can't get to the hospital. So it's always a good idea to have enough fuel to be able to at least drive to the hospital. Don't wait for these scenarios to happen and then complain about it on social media. Think about what can affect you and do something about it now. It's my understanding that that power outage actually affected half of my state, which meant people were stranded in different locations because they couldn't get fuel. If that happened to us, I have a diabetic, so that would be a problem if I wasn't prepared with food and sugar in my car. Later that very same day, when the power was back on, I went to use the tap and no water came out. I found out later that it was a burst water pipe and a few of the streets around here had no water. Now, that means you can't flush your toilet and you can't have a cup of coffee if you haven't got water in your kettle, that sort of thing. But if you're prepared and you have water on hand, then it's not a problem. And these examples are just minor inconveniences of everyday life. Shit happens. But if you're prepared, it's not even a thing. So the more people that are prepared for the basic stuff, that's going to help. And the more prepared you get, the better everyone will be. Another example I have is more recently here, cat food was not available. So I didn't even really notice for the first few weeks. What I did notice was that each week I'd put my cat food order in for cans and nothing would come back. It was unavailable. And I would do it the next week and it was unavailable. And this kept happening, but it wasn't affecting me because I was just supplying my backup stock. And one of my friends said to me, "Oh, we're not able to get cat food. We haven't been able to get cat food for such a long time." And I found out, I looked into it, and the supply was cut. I'm not really sure why, but the supermarkets weren't getting their cat food. And I mean, cats can eat all sorts of things. You can give them meat if you've got some, and canned food that you can yourself if you've got canned meat. But most people, I don't know anyone who cans in real life. Of course, all my YouTube friends do, but I don't know people who are canning, like in person. Now, having a supply of cat food is not life and death because, it's more important to have your own food. But in this instance, let me tell you, if we'd run out of cat food cans, we would have been in for trouble because Jasper is the most spoiled cat that I know, and he would have given us such a hard time if he didn't have his 24/7 supply of tinned cat food. He is bad enough if his bowl gets empty on that side. He can still have a full side of dry, but if that side runs out with the wet food, we are in for it. And we would get no peace and he would drive us absolutely crazy. So I am grateful that I had plenty of supply of cat food. But then there's other things you've got to think about. Your own food, your medications. if you're not a prepper, at least have the medications that you need to be able to use if the supply chain is cut. I mean, if they cut the supply chain of insulin, we would be screwed. Where we live here, we're not able to get a good supply of insulin, and they keep track of how much you get and they only give you a certain amount. And that to me is a great concern because I don't have control over that. But things like Panadol, I can have enough. I mean, I'm not stocking up like a drug dealer, but I've got enough that if I have a headache, I know that I'll be able to manage. Not like I get headaches all the time. I know I've talked about that earlier, but I'm not getting them all the time. And I try not to have that at all anyway. But if the supply chain was cut with that for a month, you wouldn't want to run out of that in case that was the time where you did get whatever and you needed it. As far as medicines go, I've just stocked up on a few things like gastro medication. Now, we've never used that in the history of our family, but if we needed it, that would be something that would be very beneficial, especially if it was my diabetic child, because that could save me a hospital trip. If they're vomiting, they're not keeping their sugar in, and then they start going low, and then they've got to have more sugar, and how can you have sugar if you're vomiting? And it can be a big nightmare. So if I've got some gastro medication on hand, whether I use it or not, hopefully not, but that could be save us going to the hospital. And if you don't have a diabetic, who wants to be managing gastro? Like really, like if you can stop the symptoms, wouldn't you rather do it? I've also got some antihistamines and hydrolyte tablets, which is for rehydrating a sick person, which there are natural remedies, but sometimes in the midst of someone being sick, you can't be mixing them up. Especially if it was me sick, that would be a problem because, you know, if I was dehydrated and I was too sick to make up the remedy, then having a tablet like hydrolyte would be very beneficial. So they're just some things to consider. I definitely start with your main medicine cabinet, the things you normally have. I mean, that's the most important. We also have herbs here. We grow a lot of herbs. I dry a lot of herbs, and I can make tinctures and things like that, natural remedies. So I try to keep away from mainstream medicine, but there's a time and a place, and having these tablets sitting in the cupboard, we don't have to use them, but if we need them, they are there. You just don't know when the supply chain is going to get cut. It can be an industrial thing where the company's not producing the food or medicine or whatever. It can be a transport strike, not that we really get strikes anymore, but we used to. Or if something happens, like whether there's no petrol so that they can't be delivering to our town, you want to be prepared for that sort of thing. Another thing is when we get our floods and bushfires, the town can be cut off. So we might be safe, but if we can't get our medicines in, then that's a problem. And I haven't even really talked about foods as far as prepping. If you're starting out prepping or you just don't know where to start, think about what you actually use. If you don't eat rice, don't stock up on rice. Seriously, if your family doesn't eat rice, don't stock up on it. And if you are stocking up on rice, stock up on the one you like. I used to stock up on basmati rice because we used to use that every now and then. But I find we love arborio rice. We eat that every week, so that's what I'm stocking up on. Don't stock up on brown rice because there's such a high oil content that it will go rancid before you get to use it, and it won't even be good for making heat sacks. I know many of you actually are preppers, some of you quite hardcore preppers, and I mean, that's the ultimate dream, isn't it? If you're a prepper, go for it, and I think that's awesome. I think with prepping, skills are really important to be able to manage situations, and having supplies definitely helps. I wanted to talk about prepping in a video just to plant the seed and get you to think about basic prepping, because I know there are people with these huge pantries and they don't even fill them up, and they're not prepared. They just go shopping every week and that's how they live. And I know a lot of you, if you're making something and you don't have the ingredient, you just pop down to the shop. Like, that fascinates me, that people just pop into the shop because they've run out of something, or they think, oh, I'm going to make something, I'll pop into the shop to get the ingredients. That doesn't happen here. We don't do that. So if we need something, we've got it. And hopefully we don't run out of it, because I'm ahead. I'm always ahead. Even though we're in tight times because of my illness and I haven't been able to work, and I'm not saying that so that you feel sorry for me or I'm the victim or poor me or anything. It's the way it is. I have to sleep so much that the most energy I have is making these videos for you. But because I'm prepared, my focus is being prepared and not running out of food, because I know what it's like to have no food, and I'm never going to have that happen again. So I'm ahead. I'm always ahead now. And that's because I've made it a huge priority. Yeah, I need to feed my family. So that's been a priority. Anyway, I hope you've got some value out of this video. Leave your comments below as to if you prep and how much you prep, like whether you're prepping a lot. I mean, I know people who are huge preppers don't really necessarily want to talk about their preps, but let's get some inspiration to try and inspire people who don't prep to start prepping. Even just, like I said, basic prepping, just basic organising. And I know prepping has such a bad connotation. When people say, oh, you're a prepper, they think of, well, you know what they think of. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's pretty full on. But hell yeah, I'm a prepper. If you want to know more about prepping and you want some sensible, inspirational content on prepping, then go over and check out my friend Alaska Prepper's channel. He has an awesome channel that is really sensible and it has so much good information, and it's very inspiring to prep without being too crazy. Now, I know some of you are already Alaska Prepper community members, so a big shout out to you guys as well. You're all awesome. I'll leave the information on Alaska Prepper's channel in the description below. Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.